Salvete discipuli, this is Magister Muth once again walking through some lines from Pliny's Epistulae. We're going to wrap up our letter 616 today, starting in line 61. And as a reminder, I use the color coding scheme you can see in the top right corner to help annotate the different noun cases. All right, we start with our adverb iam, which is now. And now we have two things contrasted. We have the dies. It was day, where? Elsewhere, like an alibi is I was somewhere else. But there, it was nox. And you might notice that there actually isn't a verb there. So we're going to have to be supplying a lot of missing linking verbs. We can put an erat in there. It was day elsewhere, there it was night, talking about the ash cloud obscuring the sky. And we might notice this is a good example of a chiastic word order, also known as chiasmus, where the nouns are corresponding on the outside, the corresponding adverbs on the inside create that nice ABBA order. All right, so it was nice elsewhere. And what kind of night? It is some comparative adjectives here, nigrior, darker, and a little quay there, densior, denser. And when we have a comparative, that goes with a than, which can either be the word quam or an ablative of comparison. Darker and denser than all nights. So very dark night. And we're going to continue on with quam, referring back to the night. So a night which, tamen, however, or nevertheless, we need our subjects now. Faces multi, many torches, and varia lumina, various lights, were dispelling, were breaking up or loosening. So the torches and lights, they were breaking up the direct object, which is quam, referring back to the night. And this is called a connective relative. And if you don't like using which to connect all the way back to the last sentence, you can always say, instead of which night, you could say, and this night. So, and these torches and lights were breaking up this night. So it's not complete darkness. Continuing on, placuit, that is, it was pleasing, a perfect tense impersonal. And we don't have for whom it was pleasing in the dative, but we can assume it's a them. So it was pleasing for them to do what? Now we want an infinitive. Egredi, a deponent present infinitive. To go out where? Onto the shore, alitus, with an accusative showing motion, onto. And we have a second verb here, to adspicere, to look ex proximo, from the closest or from nearby. And we need an object of what it's looking at. And what do they want to look at? Well, that's going to be answered by this clause here with a subjunctive verb, imperfect subjunctive, and equid. It's a somewhat more indefinite form of quid, which looks like a question word. So we actually have an indirect question. So they were looking basically to find out equid, whether or what kind the mare admitteret. So basically what the sea was now allowing or admitting. In other words, they wanted to check, can they leave by ship now? Have the conditions changed with the bad winds and low tide? And this quote, another connective relative, referring back to the mare, so which sea, and the sea, permanebat, was staying, from moneo, here acting as a linking verb, because you can stay happy, stay important. So the sea was staying still, ad hoc, to this point, vastum, vast, and ad versum, opposing, hostile, kind of turned against the current situation. So, can we leave by sea? No, we can't. There, recubans, that's a nominative participle, lying down, where super linteum, on top of a linen sail or a piece of cloth that was objectum, was from Iacchio, thrown out on the ground. So lying on top of that, we have someone who proposcit and hausit. Well, who was it? Usually the subject, if we're talking about a singular person here, is once again Pliny the Elder, the avunculus. Lying on top of this beach towel, basically, he demanded, proposcit, aquam frigidam, cold water, and he hausit, he drank it down, or drained the cup. And he did this, semel is technically once, and atque iterum, once and again, which is really meaning again and again. Then we have a couple subjects here, the flammae, the flames, and the praenuntius flammarum, the four-messenger, the foreteller of flames, namely, described by an appositive, the odor sulphuris, the smell of sulfur. So the flames and the smell of sulfur, they do two things. They vertunt, turn away alios, the other people, into flight, and they excitant, they wake up that guy. And that guy being the uncle once again. So notice that we have once again a nice chiastic word order creating that contrast. So since he needed a breather, and he's getting perked up by the situation, while everyone else fled. Initens, that's another present participle, describing Pliny again, leaning on, and with the in, we could say it is a compound verb, so those usually take a dative object. So leaning on two servolis, that's a diminutive form of servi, enslaved people, so to perhaps young enslaved people or smaller enslaved people. Leaning on them, he assurrexit, he got up, and immediately concedet, fell down. And here we have ut with an indicative, which we'll translate as. So he did this as I collico, as I collect, as I gather. That's Pliny talking about his second-hand knowledge here. And now we're going to jump to this ablative absolute, spiritu obstructo, from spirare, to breathe, with his breathing obstructed by the agent here, by a crassiore, a comparative, a rather thick or a thicker caligo, by a thick mist or cloud. So we can't breathe due to all the smoke. And with his stomaco, here not a stomach for food, but your windpipe, with his windpipe having been closed, two ablative absolutes here. The windpipe which, qui, illy here being a dative pronoun for that guy, for the uncle again, the avunculus, which erat. So his windpipe was, with our ablative natura, by nature, invalidus, not strong, et angustus, and narrow, and frequently aestuans, literally boiling or seething, probably here talking about inflammation from asthma. Now, fade to dark on Pliny the Elder. We pick up again, ube dies reditus, when day was returned. Notice it's a perfect participle, and we're going to have to put that est in to make it a full verb. So when day was returned, parenthetically, is that, as in that day erat tertius, that day was the third day, ab eo, from that day, quem, which, and we have another relative clause, which he viderat, which he had seen, novissime, literally newestly or most recently. So he saw the day that the volcano started erupting, He spends night and then wakes up. There's no daylight that second day. And on the third day, this is the day after that, when daylight has returned, corpus eo, his body, inventum est. So we'll once again take our participle as a main verb. It was found. Now a couple more adjectives describing it. Integrum, intact. Elisum, unharmed. And opertum, covered up. One more time with an indicative ut, as fuerat indutus, as he had been, pluperfect, as he had been dressed. So he looks just like he did the day before. And in fact, the habitus, really the appearance of his corporis, of his body, one more time, adding in an erat. Pliny really didn't like those linking verbs this paragraph. The appearance of his body was similior, more similar. In English, we say similar to, goes with a dative, to quiescenti, a present participle, to a person who is resting, than defuncto, to a person who has been defunct, who is dead. That's a perfect participle from a deponent verb, so than someone who has died. Wrapping up the letter. Meanwhile, at Misenum, that's technically a locative location of a city, at Misenum, ego et mater, my mother and I, now Pliny cuts himself off, said nihil, nihiles, but it is nothing ad historiam, nothing pertaining to history. Nec voluisti, here the subject is you, Tacitus, the addressee of the letter. Actually, in fact, we have it right here. And tu voluisti, you don't want, scire, don't want to know. What do you not want to know? Aliud, something else, anything else. Quam, this will be another than. You don't want to know something other than de exitu eius, about his death, his exit. Therefore, ergo, faciam, we just have a future indicative, a little more rare. I will make a finum. I will make an end. But adiciam, another future, I will add unum. I will add one thing. That. Now this clause has a lot of stuff going on, but our core here is going to be we have an indirect statement, which we might remember have accusative subjects and ablative and infinitive verbs. So I'm going to skip relative clause 1, relative clause 2, and a little cum clause inside it, and go to omnia me persecutum, missing the linking verb esse. And with indirect statements, you can't really tell what the subject is without context usually. If there are two accusatives, since our subject is accusative too, usually the subject is first. But if we look really closely at that ending, that is singular, masculine, and accusative, which can only agree with me. Me is our subject. I will add one thing, that I, persecutum esse, have followed omnia, everything. And here he's going to talk about his sources. So in his narrative, I have followed everything. Now we need our relative clause to say what kind of everything? Everything quibus interfuerum. So all the things for which I, pluperfect, had been present or involved in. Another compound verb going with that dative quibus. So I follow the things I was involved in, the things I saw firsthand, and, a little quay here, I also followed the things which audieram, short for audieveram, that's a syncopation, the things which I had heard, two pluperfects, which I had heard immediately, and he's going to qualify this with the cum clause, immediately when vera, true things, memorantur, are remembered most greatly. So your memory is freshest immediately. So he got even secondary sources. He got those accounts from the people who saw it right away. And he's going to wrap up by addressing Tacitus one more time. Tu excerpes. That's going to be a excerpere, I believe, is a third conjugation, so as a future, ham and eggs future, not a present subjunctive. So you will excerpt the potissima, the most possible, most relevant, most preferable things. So yeah, choose what you want of a story to tell in your wonderful history. And this last one, we have some lovely parallel structure with some ellipsis to wrap up. So we're going to have aliud est, and then another aliud. And when we have two aliuds, that's a one versus another. So it is one thing, and we're going to need to use this verb scribere a couple times. It is one thing to write a letter. It is another thing to write history. So to be really clear, that's our first subject, first object, second subject, second object. And he's going to do another contrast. It is one thing to write to a friend. It is another thing to write to everyone. So here he's contrasting his own letter writing to a friend to Tacitus's historical project writing to everyone. And then he wraps up his letter with a lovely voile. Goodbye. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with more.